Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello, whatever time it is, if you are listening to this on the Temple Beth Am podcast, Chag, Isru Chag, and Chag Purim, Shushan Purim Sameach.
Is it really Isru Chag?
No, it's not Isru Chag. But what is Isru Chag? So Isru Chag is whatever we want it to be. It's when you... we want to wish an early Mazel Tov to Renee, who very soon will be getting on a plane to go to Mexico, where Liat will become married, assuming I'm able to get there as well. Otherwise, she'll have to just remain...
Blee neder.
But Mazel Tov, Renee, on this wonderful...
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Depending on how quick we go today, we're gonna be hitting a stretch of a rare 5 verses where Rashi's quiet, and so I have once we get there, on each of those verses, there's at least one medieval commentary that I'm going to bring something for, because they're interesting verses, and Rashi, I don't know, he went to bed or something like that. What is Bina saying? I'm quite. Can you all hear me on Zoom well? I mean, Bina saying that she's having a hard time hearing me. Others are loud.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
You're okay.
And should I do the whole thing in a brug?
Yes.
Yes, Skalawag. Okay.
I think you should do this wedding.
No, you have to do it with Hispanic accents.
Oh, I should do the wedding service as Sean.
Yes,
as
Hispanic accent.
doing Sean Connery. Okay. Mawish, yeah. Okay, it still feels like Purim here. So I have us having...
Are there any famous rabbis from Scotland? Are there any Scottish Jewish rabbis?
I mean, I would think that all of the Scottish rabbis are Jewish, so I think that adjective...
Yeah. Is there any commentary from Scotland? No?
Apparently, the defense minister under Margaret Thatcher was Malcolm Rifkind, a Scottish Jew. Okay. Yalla. We read verse 2, but not the Rashi on verse 2. So we're in chapter 7, verse 2 of the book of Shemot. Let me read the verse again to get us going. Ata tidaber, or depending on how you lay it, ata tidaber, es et kol asher atzaveka, v'haron achicha yidaber al paro, v'shilach b'nei Israel mi'artzo. So again, we read this. You, Moses, will speak that which, or all that which I command you, and Aaron, your brother, will speak to Pharaoh, and a similar ambiguity in terms of the syntax of the next phrase, similar to what we had a few verses ago, something like, and then he will dispatch the children of Israel from his land, or so that, it's hard to know what the implied connective tissue is between the speaking and Pharaoh's action, but that's the basic meaning of the verse. So you're going to speak, and Aaron's going to speak. Rashi picks up on, well, I won't give it away. Let's see what Rashi picks up on. So we're reading Ata Tidaber. Alan, do you want to read?
Sure. Ata Tidaber Pam Echad Kol Shlichut Ushlichut Kefi Sheshamato Mipi V'Aaron Achicha Yamlitzenu V'Yit Imanu Be'oznei Pharaoh.
Okay, so we're going to translate Rashi, and then we're going to do that backwards game, the Rashi Jeopardy. What's the question that Rashi is answering?
Okay.
Shir, do you have space? Okay.
So you will speak to Pharaoh one time, Kol HaShlichut, everything that I sent or that I said to you.
Yeah.
Ushlichut, the message, the way that came from my mouth.
Yeah. What do you think Rashi means with the Hebrew phrase kol shlichut v'shlichut? How would you render that in sort of colloquial English? Each and every, right? So you Moshe are going to speak once, and when you speak, you're going to kind of mention in advance each and every, I'm adding here, upcoming moment of being a shaliach. Each of the things that are going to happen, every single one.
It's kind of like the doubling of a verse, of a verb.
Say that again?
It's kind of like doubling of a verb, like where it's truly, really strong.
Right. I think this here, it's less a truly in terms of emphasis. It's more a, wait, how come you're not seeing the screen? Hector, can we get I don't know why my screen isn't showing on the back here. It is plugged in. One second, everybody. Today is the day of technical challenges. Thank you. All right, well, Hector's trying to fix that. This is a kind of a medieval Hebrew way of saying every single one. So you, Moshe, do have a speaking role, and you're going to kind of announce or pronounce or anticipate all the upcoming shlichut that's going to happen. And kafisha shemata mipi, which means
it's everything that you heard from my mouth.
right. Okay.
V'Aharon achicha, and your brother Aaron, Yamlitzu will like fill in the detail, fill it in the Yamlitz will complete the thoughts or something like Yamlitz.
We looked at a word last week where a biblical word melitz. Remember the context? Where did we find the melitz in the Torah? In the Joseph story, when Yosef is being met by the brothers, there was a melitz benotam. There was an interpreter between them. It's another biblical word of the interpreter. The Bible did not know the word metargem. That's a rabbinic Hebrew word.
It was Ephraim or Manasseh, right?
Depending on the midrash, right? And that's so that Yosef could perpetuate the ruse that he did not understand the brothers, even though he did. So lahamlitz is to interpret. There's a Israeli educational, at least there was an educational nonprofit called Melitz. The idea of like interpreting and sharing over the text in a way that people understand it. So Aaron is going to do the expansive work. And how would you translate yat imenu? What's the root?
Yat ta'am, to give a taste.
To give a taste or what else does that mean?
Palatable.
What else?
Trope.
Mat'im, it's fitting.
Mat'im is with a taf. Reason. Ta'am is also a reason. In rabbinic Hebrew, to give a ta'am for something is to explain something, right? So it's related to the notion of taste, right? It's to add in texture, add in complexity. So lehamlitz and lehatim is something like he will expand and give the details of, or give the rationale for, where Oznei Paro.
The ears of Pharaoh.
Okay, so now we know what Rashi said. What Rashi said is, Moshe, you're going to speak generally about the upcoming shlichut that you're on, and Aaron is going to express the details and all the reasons. My question for you is, what in the verse is what's troubling Rashi? What's the problem or the question in the verse such that this is Rashi's answer? Rick?
Well,
Hi. Bina, we're on 7-2. She asked me in the chat. Well, I love the this feedback, but I love the yadim menu, the ta'am, the trope, how in the English here, it says your brother shall express it in eloquent language. In the Silverman. Can you hear me?
That's Silverman's translation of the Rashi?
Yeah.
The eloquent language. So the trope comes to add meaning to the words. So whatever Pharaoh hears from Moses, Aaron is going to expound on that or make it better. If I could also say at this point, the munach sakif katon ata tedaber, I'm developing this theory that it's an educational, it's a highlighting kind of trope wherever it appears. The Ten Commandments begins with it. Vaydaber Adonai, right? Both times. And the Kol HaShofar, the noise of the shofar, Moshe Yedaber at the Ten Commandments, it keeps repeating over and over again. So I just love that it's in the Rashi explanation for this as well. So that's what I wanted to say there.
And Rick, while you have the microphone, do you have an answer to the question of what the question is that Rashi's answering? How about that for chiasm?
The question that he's at,
You know what Rashi's saying? The question is, what in the verse needed this comment by Rashi? Barry and then Alan?
don't know.
Okay, it's fine.
So it's the circle. Tadber et kol asher atzavecha v'acharon achicha. And it's my translation.
I know. I want to guess. I'm sorry, Barry.
Okay, but Rick, hold on.
Okay.
That I command you and Aaron, and then your brother will speak to Pharaoh. So it's kind of a catch here. So what's that all about? Atzavecha, meaning I'm commanding you, v'acharon, and then v'achicha tadaber. So I'm commanding you and Aaron, and your brother will say. And Rashi's trying to straighten that out.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, I think you've got both times where people are, you have a command speaking. It says first, I'm going to say, it says, God saying, you shall speak that I command you. So it's like Pharaoh, it's like Moses will be speaking to Pharaoh. And then it says, and Aaron, your brother, shall speak to Pharaoh. So you have both Aaron and Pharaoh speaking to Pharaoh. Why do you have it say it separately? Why not just say Aaron and Moses spoke to Pharaoh? They have two separate verses. Two times it says speak. What's the difference between the two speeches that are being made?
So I think if you combine what Alan and Barry said, I think you get close to Rashi's question. Why isn't this just atem tidabru? You will speak to Pharaoh, right? If you're both going, why is this split up? And why does only Moshe get the kol asher atzaveka, right? And so Rashi says is, you each are going to have a speaking role to Pharaoh, but you're going to have different roles. And so they deserve different clauses. You, Moshe, your primary responsibility is basically to communicate to Pharaoh that you've been in touch with me, God, and that Pharaoh should know that all this is coming from God. But you're not an orator, and you're not comfortable in these situations. So Aaron's going to provide the details, not because I spoke to Aaron. I spoke to you, but Aaron is going to flesh out the texture and the eloquence of what I want to communicate. Joel and then Larry.
I think it's also supposed to disabuse us of the idea that Moshe is supposed to go to Aaron and just do a big, debriefing. This is everything he told me, and then Aaron's going to go to. It's like, no, you say something, Aaron says something. You say something, Aaron says something.
Aha.
One at a time.
Got it. Okay, good possibility. Larry? And then I see, Barbara, your hand.
So in answer to your question about what Rashi was questioning, I agree with you. Rashi's question is, who's speaking when and to whom?
Yeah.
And I'm going to clarify it. And he clarifies it by, as you said, that you shall speak, but it doesn't say to whom. So even Rashi leaves it a little ambiguous, perhaps. So, and I'm hung up on the two vavs in the pasuk, because it seems to me the pasuk is divided into three parts, even though it's divided into two parts by the trope. And the first part is, and you. We have a problem here in English in terms of plural and singular use, and what
The two Utes?
yeah, the two you.
The two what?
Anyways, you Moses shall speak everything that I command to you, Moses. Barry, I think that atzavecha is singular.
Correct.
So he's commanded to Moses only. Then there's a big comma, because you got the enachta and you got the va here. And I'm going to say, and then Aaron, your brother, will speak to Pharaoh. And then I think that there's another big comma there. And the big comma there is V'shilach. We talked. This is not your question now. We talked about last week. V'shilach et bnei Yisrael me'artzo. And I'm surprised that Rashi doesn't address that question either.
As to what is the connecting thread to V'shilach?
What we talked last week is, are we saying that Aaron will say to Pharaoh, let my people go, or that Aaron will speak to Pharaoh, comma, and he will let the people go? V'shilach et bnei Yisrael. Remember, we had a controversy.
Right, and we and just to pause you, and then go back to you, we also had a similar controversy in verse 13, where there are several different ways of understanding the relationship between the speaking that Moshe and Aaron are going to do and Pharaoh's releasing the Israelites from there. Is it an anticipation? Is it a prediction? Is it a cause and effect? And we weren't sure exactly how to understand it there. Similar here. Rashi says something more about it there than he does in this situation. Keep going. Oh, you were done?
No, well, we're going to see that it can't be the last one because of what follows in the next verse. But it does seem to me that there are breaks here in the pasuk.
Yeah.
So my reading, contrary to Rashi's, would be that God speaks to Moses, and then Moses speaks to his brother, or he says to his brother's ear, and then it's Aaron who's speaking to Pharaoh.
So you're saying V'atah tedaber et kol asher atzaveka is not you, Moses, will speak to Pharaoh everything of him, but you'll speak to Aaron. It's very interesting. So so then maybe that actually strengthens Rashi as saying even more loudly, it doesn't mean that.
Right, exactly.
Very nice. Thank you. Barbara and then Diane.
Well, I agree with Larry that Moses is going to have to talk to Aaron and say it. But I think that this is Rashi's way of saying that God is putting Moses into command. Therefore, Moses is the only person that God will talk to. And God then tells everybody else, Moses then tells everybody else what God has said. God's not going to talk to Aaron. He's only talking to Moses. So Moses is the boss. Moses is the head honcho, no matter what happens. And God is accepting the fact that Moses has a language difficulty with his mouth. Mm-hmm. So he's saying, okay, Moses, you tell your brother, he will talk for you, but you're the one in charge. You're the one I'm talking to.
Got it. Great. Thank you, Barbara. Diane?
So I have another question, and that is, there's all this language about the choreography of speaking to Pharaoh, a lot of verses about how this is all going to take place, and very little, unless I've forgotten, about talking to the Israelites themselves to convince them that they actually should go. And it just seems really peculiar to me, because I think up until this point, the talk is that Pharaoh is going to let them go as opposed to chasing them out, which comes later.
Yeah.
So sort of bizarre.
Right. And the only thing we've heard relatively recently in the story is that the Israelites were not immediately responsive. They were actually angry at Moshe for the intervening. What you said might add some ta'am, to how Rashi is going to read verse 3. So remember what Diane said. Hopefully we'll get to it today, so it'll be soon enough. I see Joanna's hand.
Someone just referenced that Moses is the head honcho, and I think there's something in this text that actually is meant for us to keep in mind that God is the head honcho. So there's like an even though here. Even though it's almost like a bit of a game of telephone. It's God talking to Moses, who will talk to Aaron, who will talk to Paro. Unlike the game of telephone, the message is going to remain intact. And you will see this promise, and that maybe helps explain this phrase that we have at the end of verse 10. You will see that this promise that I'm making to you, even though this is going to happen through a chain of several people, in the end, Shilach et bnei Yisrael me'artzo.
Very nice. Good. So that's like Larry, an alternate reading of the verse, an alternate reading of Rashi. Very nice. Larry again. Joanna, if you speak again, there was something that was muffling your voice. We heard you, but it was very hard to hear, so I don't know if something was covering the microphone. So for next time, if you maybe can make that clearer. Go ahead, Larry.
The juxtaposition of Purim and Joanna's comment just hit me. I'm sure that this has already been commented on in many sources. It just occurred to me, perhaps Megillat Esther was written precisely to make the opposite point. Don't rely on God. Man, Mordechai and Esther, you're in charge of your own destiny. The stories are just too similar that can't be an obvious motivation for having written this story. Tell me that this thousands of commentaries on exactly that.
There are lovely kind of modern articles and classes I've heard that compare Moses to Mordechai, Joseph to Moses, Joseph to Daniel, and all of them combined, and to find the themes and the stories and the differences in the way that the Tanakh represents standing in front of a foreign king and the effectiveness of that shlichut. And I was going to say something else that just slipped my mind about what you said. Lost it. If it comes back to me, I'll say it. Any other comments on the table? Alan? You need a microphone.
Oh, okay.
And then Joanna.
I'm looking at the Mikro Dolot that I have. It's the conservative movement Mikro Dolot. So
Well,
it doesn't go through all the
JPS.
the JPS.
Yeah.
That's not conservative movement.
It's just a publishing house.
Okay.
The JPS English translation happens to be the one that is in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, and it may be that when the JPS was founded in Philadelphia in the early 1910s, it was associated with some of the scholarship from JTS, but it's just a publishing house right now.
Okay. It has a comment by Nachmanides on 7.2, and the only thing it says is, Rashi's comment is completely wrong.
Yeah. I mean, Ramban says that. Ramban says that with some frequency, and then usually he explains it. But he often says, Zelashon Rashi v'Zilanachon or Aloni Rebbe Einai. I'm trying to see if I can find that in the original. You see that on 7.2? I don't see any Ramban on 7.2.
I'm looking at it right here.
It's not in the.
It's not in the. It's not in the Ramban. The Ramban is not in the Ramban.
Rabbi,
I'm not agreeing with you.
Nachmanides, you shall repeat 7.2. Rashi's comment is completely wrong.
Hold on a second.
I couldn't make that up if I tried.
Hold on. Let's see if it really doesn't exist in Safaria.
I just never seen anything like that.
Tanakh, Exodus 7:2, commentary. There's no Rambam. So JPS must have unearthed a manuscript or conjured a ghost Ramban, because it's not in Safari, which is pretty comprehensive. It's not in the Torah Chaim, which is an academic, scholarly version of the Mikra Dolot. So I believe you because Ramban says that, but I don't see it. But I believe you, but I don't believe you. Okay. Joanna, did someone put a word in the chat?
Just a quick aside back to that comment that you were making about the comparisons throughout Tanakh of stories echoing themes. Very funnily, a friend of mine recruited a bunch of laners to have a little friendly competition amongst ourselves for Rick and everyone else who loves this kind of thing. Phrases in Megillat Esther that are repeated elsewhere in Tanakh, not only the phrase, but to the same trope. So even though Esther has its own melody, the phrase is punctuated the same way. And fascinatingly, I want to say the most from any section of Tanakh is from the story of Joseph, where you have phrases, word for word phrases, repeating from Joseph in Esther to the same to Amin.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some kind of message in that.
Yeah, the Joseph, as I said to Larry, the Joseph, Megillah, and Daniel, which is a very interesting and very understudied book, right? There's some fascinating narrative, plot, and Trupp through lines, and kind of Moshe in Pharaoh's court seems to be like the archetype of God's Jewish messenger in front of a foreign king, and yet the connections seem the specific narrative connections seem to be tighter when you're comparing Joseph to the Purim story. Okay, can we go forward? Okay, let's read verse 3. Tova, do you want to read verse 3? Let's give Tova the mic. We only have one extra working mic. Is that why we're doing this? Okay, Alan, you're getting your steps in. Yes.
ואני אקשה את לב פרעה והרביתי את אותי ואת מופתי בארץ מצרים.
Okay.
And I will, let's see, and I will akshay, I will make hard the heart of Pharaoh, and I will increase, multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt.
Very good. Beautiful translation. Okay. We're now getting into a topic that will hover over us throughout the entire 10 plagues. We'll go in and out of discussing it. And that is the particularly as we as moderns try to kind of overlay in a fair way onto ancient texts and modern morality, right? Part of that is unfair. As Rabbi Chorny and I taught last week, there's this notion called presentism or presentism, where it seems it's ahistorical and unfair to take present-day morality and throw it onto previous generations. And that seems to be a movement, meaning there's a movement of presentism in our generation, and some people consider that to be a ridiculous notion. But we can't not do it at all. It's impossible for us to read the ancient text and not imagine, how it should be judged based on our standards. We're going to be toiling with the God freeing our people, allowing us to become a people, toying, it seems to be, with a Pharaoh, right? And God as the hardener of the heart, and then the punisher of the hardened heart, right? That is a moral conundrum that every significant Torah commentary of note, medieval and modern, had dealt with, and no one has resolved perfectly, right? How can the hardener of the heart be the punisher of the hardened heart? I want to remind you that we have had one reference to this notion before, but in different language. Go back to 4:21. So everyone should, I don't need to pull up on the screen, because if you have a book of Shemot, just go back to chapter 4:21. This is back of the burning bush, or sort of at the end of the burning bush. Vayomer Adonai al Moshe, God said to Moses, Belechtecha lashuv Mitzrayma, in your going back to return to Egypt, Re'eh, look, see, Kol HaMaftim, same word as Tova just read, all of the wonders, Asher Samti Viadecha, that I have placed in your hand. This word wonder does not, in this verse, refer to the plagues. It refers to the miracles, the tricks that God had given to Moshe so that God could convince the people and Pharaoh that Moshe convinced the people and Pharaoh that Moshe was someone to be dealt with seriously. Va'asitam lifnei Pharaoh, do all these things in front of Pharaoh. And what am I going to do next, God says? Va'ani achazek et libo. The root chazak and the root kasher are used somewhat interchangeably throughout the whole story of the plagues, to harden or to stiffen, to strengthen or to toughen, right? And kaved, sorry, there's a third one, and to make heavy. Here, the first use of it is, I will, it can't, and we spent a long time on this whenever we were in this, probably a year and a half ago. It can't mean to strengthen his heart, right? So chazak does not only mean to strengthen, but somehow to make it so strong that it's not willing to be softened. V'lo yishalach et ha'am, and he will not dispatch the people. So from the very beginning, God predicts that God is going to have a role in what's going to happen to Pharaoh's heart. God's going to have a role in what's going to happen that's going to make Pharaoh resist Moshe's entreaty, to open Pharaoh up for punishment, right? And that could be a problematic notion. Here we have aksheh, we had achazek. Okay, Barry, just throw it. By the way, Joanna, in your community, you dress up for Shushan Purim also, or is that just the hat you wear to work?
The day school I work for had off for Purim yesterday altogether, so they celebrate Shushan Purim with a carnival and whatever to have some in-school fun also.
I love it. Wonderful. Okay,
So,
Barry.
Just as a way of slowing this down, because it's so enjoyable. The Vishalach in the previous verse, normally we're saying and to send the Israelites out. But my translation here, and I kind of agree with this, but that he should send. In other words, they're speaking to Pharaoh that he should. And what this begins is it's a dialectical process that raises the intensity over time. So the hardening of the heart it's a dialectical. Each time they speak, and he responds. It raises the intensity.
Right.
And so that he should do this.
And the flow between the end of verse 2 and the beginning of verse 3 is interesting if you take what Barry said, right? So at the end of verse 2, it seems to say, particularly if you read as Vishilach as so that you will, it is, you're going to speak to Pharaoh, Aaron's going to make it clear, so that he will dispatch the Israelites. And what am I going to do next? And then I'm going to make him so it won't happen. Right, so it does seem to be a little bit of anticipated toying with a tyrant. And is that okay, or is that not okay? And how we feel about it being okay now, right? Would it be okay for one of the ways in which we deal with Russia today to toy with Putin and punish him as opposed to just quelling the war? Like, would that be acceptable in international diplomacy, or would that be cruel? A lot of hands. Okay, Larry, Diane, Ilan. Hector, there's no way to get that second microphone working today, huh? Okay, all good.
I promise I'm going to try to be brief. First, to answer your question, no, it's not the same thing at all. The whole point here is, why is God hardening Pharaoh's heart? It's so that he can multiply the signs. It's not to punish Pharaoh at all. And this is a bit. Yeah, the Peshat in the verse is very clear. It's that God is going to change Pharaoh's mind or do something to Pharaoh to God's going to be the instrument. Pharaoh has no free will. And Pharaoh has no free will. Why? So that I can do my job of amazing you all and the Egyptians and everybody. That's the purpose. This is the introduction to, or one of the introductions to, a real theological question, which is, who is responsible here? Do we have free will? And if in fact God is hardening Pharaoh's heart, then Pharaoh's not the evildoer. But we know that's not the case, right? So the question is, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the connection between this story and the Purim story, and who it is. Haman was responsible for his evil unequivocally. We never said he was caused to do that by God. But here there's this question, and I think that this is here because we struggle with the issue. When we pray to God to cause change, are we really saying, okay, we're not responsible and we're also not capable? And if that's the case, if you really believe that, then evildoers are not responsible for their actions either. I think the whole, and I'll end here, the question is an ongoing one, and it's an unanswerable one as to who it is that's responsible for good actions, evil actions, etc.
You've said a lot there. I want to respond briefly to some of it and then go around the table. You're sort of describing that we're heading into a more an Escher painting of morality, where depending on what floor you're on, either the last thing that happened was that Pharaoh was being tyrannical, or the last thing that happened was that God was doing something to make Pharaoh more likely to be tyrannical, right? What I don't know, and this is also unanswerable, is if biblical understandings of morality, which is 1,000+ years before the rabbinic mind was developed, had any conception of whether or not there was anything off or inapt about treating Pharaoh as a toy here, right? Because you're saying that maybe the text is there in order to raise those questions in our minds, and I just don't know if a biblical conception of an evil tyrant was such that it was supposed to awaken any kind of compassion, understanding, identity with Pharaoh in this situation, or it was just this person is evil and deserves to be crushed and deserves to be toyed with on the way to being crushed. I don't know. I know that the rabbis deal with it. I have no idea what Shemot meant by it.
Couldn't it just be a rejection of dualism in the text here? In other words, there is no evil out there. God is there's only one God. And since I forget the other term for dualism, where you have the positive, the good force and the evil force.
Right.
God is the only force out there.
Right.
So everything bad is also attributable to God.
Right.
And that's a pretty early idea.
So rabbinic Judaism definitely enjoins us to kashem shemavarech ala tov kach mavarech ala ra. Even, just as we bless God for when good things happen, we have to bless God when bad things happen, right? The most awful and the most evocative bracha there is Baruch Dayan Hamet, when you rip your clothes. And I may have said a version of this in some of your presences as we've been at a funeral, that we're supposed to invoke God at the moment of loss, because we don't have a convenient theology that says that God is just there in the good moments, but God is there in the bad moments. But the Torah does want us to understand that when it says, in Parshat Re'eh, that there's bracha uklala in front of you, choose which one is yours. The Torah does want us to have agency in our choosing a path of goodness. And if we have agency in choosing the path of goodness, you would think that evil people should be considered to have agency in having chosen the path of non-goodness. And if you take a modern understanding of determinism, right, sometimes I do wonder, and I'm not suggesting that we should close all the prisons and let everyone out, but I do wonder how much control any one of us really has over a significant amount of what we do. Right? How much of it are things set in motion on a cellular level, on an atomic level, and how hard it is to change one's behavior against one's urges, right? And I wonder if the Torah kind of knew of that in the human condition, but didn't know how to say it, and its way of saying that there's no other way for a human to act but this way, saying God did it. That's just the way God created humanity, right? I have rachmanis, I have true rachmanis for people who are burdened down with urges that they didn't ask for, they didn't invite, and push them to act in a way that society doesn't accept, and which hurt people, all right? And people are victims. But I have rachmanis for them because no one chose that, right? And if they're acting in that way, there's got to be something that is so powerful, right? This sounds like a strange tangent to go down, but I'll share it because it's been in my mind recently. Our rabbinic intern from a couple of years ago, who's about to be Rabbi Josh Jacobs, was just hired as the associate rabbi of a synagogue in Cleveland. Mazel tov to Josh. And his wife was also a rabbi. They're both going to be working at the same synagogue. Why is a position open there in that synagogue? Because the former associate rabbi is now the senior rabbi, so there's a need for an associate rabbi. And why is the former associate rabbi the senior rabbi? Because the senior rabbi last summer, I believe, was caught in a sting. The sting was set up so that there was actually no potential victim, but the rabbi thought he was soliciting sexual acts with a minor. Before that moment, this was an upstanding, long-tenured, known to be good, moral rabbinic leader. It was an immediate fall from grace. There did not seem to be any indication. Right? I can't imagine the shame that person felt. In the moment, the headlines and all the colleagueship went out, understandably, to put the scarlet letter on this rabbi, was eliminated from the rabbinical assembly very quickly, and care for any potential victims had there been victims. Right? In the sting, there was no victim. And were there actually any victims in the community that we didn't know of? Turns out there probably were not, at least not in the community. What I did, I'd met this rabbi once, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here. I'm just suggesting how I understand the complexity of the human condition. I emailed this person to let this person know that I couldn't imagine the darkness this person was confronting, and I wanted him to know that there was at least one person out there who was a colleague of his who cared for him, because my immediate concern was not only were there any victims, but was this person going to take his own life? Because I can't imagine living one day after this comes out. And he and I were in email contact with each other for a little bit. This, whatever urges this person has, he didn't choose it, and probably wishes for all that he could afford that it didn't exist in his mind, right? And we're living in an era where it is now the case, and it's a good thing, that previously illicit and shunned sexual urges are now considered normative and celebrated in society and in Jewish society, and we most progressive applaud that. But some sexual urges are not. They're still considered absolutely inappropriate and illicit in society, and that's probably a good thing. But if you really think back how a human being is created, why does it have to be? I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but if my sexual urges are over here and society is now allowing me to celebrate them and live that way, but my sexual urges are over here and society is suggesting that can never be made okay, I didn't choose that. I have Rahmanas for that person. I have Rahmanas for any victims, but I have Rahmanas because God created this person with a brain and a mind that is both able to be a rabbinic leader and an orator and a teacher, and has private sexual urges that has no acceptable expression in our society. That must be a curse. So did God do that? That's just the way human beings are. Was Pharaoh of the Torah tyrannical because he chose to be tyrannical, or is that just the path that Pharaoh was on since the moment he was created? And these are really tough questions, and I think the Bible and rabbinic society and our society are all trying to grapple with it in different ways. And as you said, the most important thing I think you said was that it's unresolvable, but it's going to be really interesting to battle through it. Okay, sermon over. Diane, Elon, Tova, Alan, Rosemary, and then class will be over.
You left off Barry.
And Barry and Rick.
So I'm trying to think of other instances in Tanakh where God directly intervenes in an individual person to change their action. And the only one that I can think of is Bilam. And it's quite the opposite of this, right? Bilam has every incentive to curse the Jews, and God makes him bless the Jews. And this seems like kind of perversely the opposite. I'm just wondering, are there any other instances?
First of all, I've never thought of that association. That's fascinating, right? God intervening towards the good, to push the dial towards the good rather than towards the bad. You asked me, are there other moments in Tanakh? I don't have the bikut in all of Tanakh to answer that with any confidence. But in Torah, where God is
Avimelech
intentionally intervening to change someone's behavior,
An individual.
Avimelech with Abraham, with taking Sarah.
Uh-huh.
In the evening, he has a dream, right?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what you mean by change behavior, right? Because like I heard someone say Noah, right? God is not intervening to change something inside Noah's mind, but he is intervening to tell Noah to do something differently than he would have done. But you're asking something different. To change the mindset. Yeah. Avimelech is an interesting example. I got to think about it more. What's that, Stevie? Lavan, say more with the microphone.
Similar to Avimelech, there's another dream right before Lavan catches up with Yaakov and his family, and he's like, hey, and then they have the showdown, and he says, I would have attacked you, except that God came to me last night and said not to touch you.
Yeah. But it's an interesting thing to think about, but I'm most taken by the contrast of the direction in which God is pushing the dial here versus there.
But the two examples that you gave were both that someone's actually trying to act and it works out differently as opposed to being convinced of something or threatened by something.
Yeah. Tova?
This is responding to a couple of things. One of them on Pharaoh, I had always leaned towards the notion that fundamentally Pharaoh's character, but also his definition within the context of Egyptian society, would give him this sense of himself as a demi-divine. And therefore, what God is doing is keeping him consistent to that, because we waver. In fact, at the end, we see Pharaoh does let them go, but then changes his mind. So what God is doing is not so much changing the true direction, but keeping him who he is. So that's one thing. Larry commented about that he's doing it because he wants to multiply his signs and wonders. And Diane had commented on when did they speak to the children of Israel? And that struck me as that's really the purpose there, that there's not just the Pharaoh who's being persuaded and addressed, but the children of Israel are being addressed. The people of Egypt are being addressed.
Yes.
And you see the consequences of that at the end with the behavior of the people of Egypt and, of course, Bnei Israel. Now, for us, it doesn't last very long. But so that second part is a really important part of the message.
Great. We probably will not get to the Rashi, but what you just said connects to something that Barry said before. If we understand some of the vavs, connecting phrases to be so that, right? If you go back to verse 2, right? You're going to speak to everything that I say, and Aaron will speak to Pharaoh, vishilach, so that he will dispatch the Israelites. If you understand the vav in our verse to mean the same thing, it's I will harden his heart, vehirbeiti datotai, so that I have pretense in order to do these dastardly things to him. And Rashi is going to say that a little more explicitly. Now, it's not the only way to read it. You can also just read it as a flow of what's going to happen next, right? That's going to happen next, not necessarily that I'm doing A in order to do B. But you can read it that way because that's why sometimes that is implied in a vav. Stevie sneaking in before Elon.
Just if we're going to go that direction, the verses continue. The ultimate, like the end of this passage of God's conception here is right. The ultimate sort of goal, perhaps, if that's how we're reading it, is that when, right, in verse 5, right, when I take the people out, it'll be from a place where I'm already known, right, as sort of as opposed to, like, I'm going to take them out and then I'll teach them about me. It's like they have, like, it has to be, and it can't just be that they know about me. It has to be that the place they come from, I'm already known there, which is, I don't know, we'll talk about it in 2 weeks when we get there.
Elon.
So to go back to the original point about hardening of the heart, my thoughts also apply coincidentally to the rabbi in Cleveland, which is it reminds me of modern day entrapment in the legal world, where a law enforcement person would argue, and I believe correctly, but it's not necessary, it's not neither here nor there, that a person can only be entrapped if they are predisposed to do that crime anyway, right? And that somebody who was not predisposed to do that crime would not be entrapped. This case with Pharaoh is exactly that yes, Adonai hardened Pharaoh's heart. Having said that, if Pharaoh was not predisposed to have his heart hardened, it would not have happened. And that kind of answers the issue about free will, right? That Pharaoh actually did have the free will, because he could have, when Adonai hardened his heart, he could have said, actually, no, that's not who I am, but it was who he was.
It's a fascinating point. One day I'd like to nurse a beer with you for 2 hours and discuss it, because it's really an important and complex thing to think through. On the one hand, I'm moved by the notion that the predisposition is itself pre-criminal, and therefore if the predisposition leads to the crime, it's because the person was liable to do that anyway. It's a little minority report.
There are people who have that if there are people who have that predisposition, there are many people who have fantasies of various thoughts, and we know that, right? And yet they're able to say, actually, yes, that's a fantasy. I actually might like to do that, but actually I know that I have self-control and will opt not to do that because I understand that my predisposition is wrong.
And the counter argument, and I'm somewhere in between, is sometimes the ease with which something wrong is able to be done influences whether or not the person is able to control the urge and do it or not do it. That's true, by the way, even in taking one's life, right? There are amazing studies about that there are plenty of people who have suicidal ideations and urges. And sometimes the difference between someone doing it and doing it successfully or not is not how depressed they are, but just how easy it is to accomplish, right? And so, I definitely think that there are human urges that have lurked in our DNA for tens of thousands of years that have been awakened and are burst through the surface in lots of the population because of the era of the internet, because people can do things now more privately, or it seems more privately in the moment, and the epidermis that is holding in our base animal urges is thinner now because there are more opportunities to explore that, right? Now, does it mean that the person is less liable? No, but I think it does mean that the circumstances have allowed some of those base urges to break through where they might not have in 16th century France because they couldn't go online and find the person they were looking for, right? It's really complicated morally and legally. Alan, Barry, Rick, class. Oh, and Rosemary. I owe you 5 extra minutes because last week was 5 minutes ended early. Go ahead.
My understanding of the hardening of the heart that I had heard from other rabbis was that the first 5 plagues, it was like, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. It was, in the passive. And it's only in the second.
Vayechazak lev paro as opposed to Vayechazek Adonai at lev paro.
Right. And then,
sorry to interrupt. There's a wonderful comment about that by Harold Kushner, in one of the moments in the Tanakh, in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, where it mentions that Rabbi Kushner is the editor of the Drash commentary there, and he makes the point you're about to make, but I'm sure you'll make it better.
All right, you're on.
No pressure. About that, the first 5, it was passive. And then after that, the second 5, God hardens heart, it says, but he's only reinforcing what was already there based on the decision. He was so connected with those feelings, there was no way he was going to be able to change because he was locked into that view.
It's the notion of habituation, right? That
yes.
Once you do 5 evil things in a row, you're inured to how evil it is. Therefore, the 6th time you do it, when we say that God is doing it for you, it's a way of saying God has created the human condition that if you have chosen the evil path 5 times in a row, now you're going to be it's very hard to pull away from that.
And yet here we're reading from the get-go in chapter 4, and here now that before the plagues are even starting, it says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart, is what God is saying. How that that seems to completely undermine the whole theory of the habituation being it. So like this is going to be from the get-go. And maybe you can try and say, well, he's doing it in order that God wants to make his name known to the people. But is this the way to make your name known to the people, by causing such destruction and havoc in the land of Egypt?
Barry, Rosemary, Rick, and we'll get to the Rashi next week.
Just a comment first. Your note of nursing a beer for 2 hours, I can't envision that.
Taking that long?
That'd have to be two beers.
Oh, I would have had a second round for sure.
So, beginning with the Kabbalistic and Zohar vision of the God as no thingness, and the angels telling God, "Don't give the Torah to the people." This no thingness needs the dialectic with human, through which further creation happens, and it's this dialectic intensity that we're going to see happen is what God knows this is going to be. and God needs that. And all the suffering we're describing of people's lives happen. God needs this because God's is a no thingness. So this is the beginning of the process here.
Great. Rosemary?
I would say for two things. First of all, hardening the heart. I think we were in a situation that people didn't know God. So it was him introducing himself. So there were gods, there were laws, but it was more human laws because the gods were humans in that time. So if he hardens the heart, it's a question that I had the same as Larry, where is my free choice? The Pharaoh can say. But if God chooses, Pharaoh has probably accepted, and probably because of that, right now Moses and Pharaoh are walking in the paradise. He's not in hell because he has followed God, Pharaoh in his way. But if we take it on a personal level, what I have gone through, I have questioned this question many times. We went to synagogue to pray. Okay, it was Shabbat. We took car. Maybe that's not good for people who respect Shabbat, but if we didn't take car, we couldn't go to synagogue. So our sin was taking the car. But the person who hit us, he was drunk driver, and he had the choice. He could have not drunk, and the street was completely empty. We were in Olympic Boulevard, 4 lanes, nobody was there. We were going home 5 minutes before home, he came. We never sued him because we don't believe in suing, but he told the police that he was bored, he went to drink. So my question was, what is that his choice? He's bored, he could have done many things. So if somebody is doing the free choice, using like that, he is responsible because we have 10 commandments, even if he's not Jewish, but he knows what's good, what's bad. Maybe in that time, there were slaves, there were eating slaves. Nobody knew what is good, what is bad, the way that we know. So we are conscious of good and bad. Whatever we do, we are responsible. And that's why I created the music festival, so the young people will go play music instead of drinking when they are bored. But in the case you were saying, I believe he was a educated person. If he has urges, there is castration. You go, you just get rid of your urges. So that there's choice. And I always told my children, you make choices, you go consequences. So he made his choice to live with that and use it one day, but he could have stopped it. So I believe in Pharaoh's time, it's okay if God did like, he put the words in Pharaoh's mouth, in Moses' mouth, because he was going to introduce 10 commandments and Torah. But now we don't have choice. We have the choice ourselves because we are choosing.
There's almost nothing to say in response to that, Rosemary, because in the face of the trauma that you're remembering, words fail. The only thing I want to say, which I've said to you many times on record, is that in my understanding of the world of good and evil and religious expectations, there's no sin for which the proper quote-unquote punishment would be the horror that you experienced. And your decision to be in shul that night was a decision towards life and community, and is only to be celebrated. And the trauma that you experienced and still experience, the tragedy, to me is utterly disconnected from the choice of how you got there. And I just want you to know that. I want you to know that again.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say that I went to the question many times saying it was, if we believe in God, death and life is in God's hand. So my daughter had to die that night, that place, that hour. And the person who executed was a drunk driver. So he was, in a way, an agent of God to do the work, or angel of death to do the work. So I even respected him. I never kept any bad feeling against him. My wish was he would get better, he would not drink and teach others, but unfortunately he didn't. And so the story is amazing, but still I respect the thing that happened because it's God's wish.
Rick, I'll give you an opportunity to share over that if you'd like. Your hand was up for a while.
I can wait. I'm certainly not going to respond to that. I was just going to add some things about the hardening of the heart, but you want to hear it? Okay, if you want. So
quickly, or start with good next week. Your choice.
Could do next week.
Okay, don't forget it.
Sure.
Last word.
Add something in general, throw this into the conversation, that we do know something about concepts of morality in Egypt at that time, even going back to Middle Kingdom, which is earlier than this period. There was something that were called the confessions that were part of the burial of any well-off Egyptian, and certainly pharaohs as well. And in the confessions were things like, I have fed the hungry, I have clothed the poor, I have cared for the needy, I have cared or helped the children of the orphans. That kind of statement. And those were being made as a move towards having their soul, when it was weighed against the feather of truth, not be condemned and not be destroyed. So there are more, what we would recognize as serious morality and concepts of obligation to other human beings that are part of that society.
That's a proper note to end on. Rick, remind me that you'll start your comment next week, and we'll get to the Rashi, which we've been now anticipating for quite some time.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.